In 2011, Dark Souls 1 came out. It received at the time, and continues to receive, an abundance of praise. Especially by me. I do a lot of that. Among its many accolades, its level design is something that's remembered fondly. More specifically, the tendency to come up across a locked door that does not open from this side, and then opening that door when you get to that other side, creating a shortcut. This is great on its own, but it was particularly satisfying when you come across one of these doors and you don't find the other side until maybe hours later, when you're exploring what you assumed was a completely different section of the map, for reasons unrelated to what you were doing when you found the door initially. You would discover to your amazement and delight that the levels in this game weave back into themselves, often making older, long-abandoned checkpoints relevant once again. This quality is something that was most present in the first half of Dark Souls 1, and the series, even onto Elden Ring, has never really gotten to those heights again. And the reason for that is clear. It's because in Dark Souls 1, you do not have access to checkpoints. You cannot fast travel until you get the Lord Vessel in Anor Londo. Because of this, for a huge amount of the game, you have to walk everywhere, so the levels have to be well designed. It's important to unlock faster ways to get to distant areas. And this necessity created what was, for me, one of my favorite moments in Dark Souls. Taking the elevator from the Undead Church to Firelink Shrine, and realizing how those two areas were connected. It was so cool, and the game was filled with stuff like that. Firelink Shrine by itself connects to so many places it's crazy. It connects to the catacombs, it connects to the Undead Burg, it connects to the lower Undead Burg and the depths through it. By heading down you can get to New Londo, Blighttown, Darkroot Garden, I guess the catacombs as well. And even better, many of those places had connections to other places that either served as temporary shortcuts or let you get to a specific area of those other levels faster. For example, yeah, you can get to Darkroot Garden by going down through the New Londo elevator, but you can also get there through the tower in the Undead Burg, or you can take the elevator up to the Undead Parish and go through it the normal way. It was so sick. So sick. I've been chasing that dragon for a very long time. This does not exist, really, in the modern From Software games. In the modern games, there will sometimes be shortcuts within a level, but there is rarely or never an attempt to make levels connect to other distant levels. There'd simply be no way to be in Altus Plateau and have it naturally weave back into the Weeping Peninsula, for example. That's not a slight against Elden Ring, but it is the case that in the From Software fanbase, there are some people that lament the direction the series has gone. And in some ways, I'm one of them. I'm not unhappy with Elden Ring or any of the other games, but it is true that all of the following games failed to scratch that level design itch. And now we can finally talk about Abiotic Factor. Abiotic Factor is a survival crafter that's very unlike most of the other games in its genre, because its survival elements and its crafting elements aren't its biggest appeal. Its strength lies in its levels and exploration, which are remarkably good. Good enough to warrant that Dark Souls preamble that I just talked about. If you're one of those people that longs for the days that Dark Souls 1 gave you, that loves being surprised and delighted when you see that a door does indeed open from the other side, then I think this is the game that's going to do it for you. In many ways, it's actually better here because the levels are huge, complicated, and detailed. There's no procedural generation. The locations are handmade. The loot is hand-placed, and the levels, for the most part, need to be tackled in a specific order. For a survival crafter, it's oddly linear, and the fact that it takes place indoors, underground, in an enclosed environment, lets them control the space. The biomes are things like laboratories, offices, and manufacturing centers, places that are structured and man-made. This unusual linearity interact with the survival elements to make some of the most satisfying progression and level design I've ever seen. I am not the only guy that's going to mention Dark Souls when talking about this game. When researching, I found at least 2 other video reviews that do the same thing. And that's because Abiotic Factor gives you the same feeling, both in opening minor shortcuts that are going to be useful in the short term, as well as discovering level-connecting major shortcuts useful in the very long term. In my opinion, the reason the levels are so good is because they are linear. It's more like Kingsfield than Dark Souls, in that They are so large, it necessitates clever use of space, especially in a survival game where you want to get loot back to your base often. As you proceed further into a sector or unlock a new one, the optimal way back to your base will change. Picture this. You're exploring an area that's not very far from your base, but as you explore that level, and more of its space becomes exhausted, the route to your home gets longer. Well, sometimes the level doesn't wrap back into itself. Instead, the levels can get so big that they lead to another part of the facility. Using this new route may not be the fastest way to get to the sector, but it will be the fastest way to get to the part of the sector that you're currently investigating. It's sick. You'd think that you get tired of seeing smart shortcut placement, but no, you just get more impressed. But at this point I'm starting to gush, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start over. This is your spoiler warning, I am not going to make an effort to be particularly spoiler-free. Abiotic Factor begins with you as a passenger in the Western Outback. You are a scientist, heading to the Gate Cascade Research Facility for your first day at work. As you descend into the underground residence sector for orientation, something goes wrong. The elevator gets redirected to offices and stops working. The facility goes into lockdown. Strange and anomalous creatures wander the halls, and you soon find out that you've been attacked by a military organization, whose origins and goals are mysterious. Your own goals are simple. Explore the different sectors of the Cascade Research Facility, use whatever you can get your hands on to arm and armor yourself, use these tools to fight past dangerous enemies, and ultimately, escape. The first thing you'll notice about this game and its art style is that it's heavily inspired by Half-Life. The graphics are intentionally trying to evoke a similar vibe, and so is the setting. It's set in a Black Mesa-inspired underground research facility, meaning that unlike most survival games, the biomes are not things like forests and deserts. Instead, you have laboratories, data farms, manufacturing centers, with layouts that are utilitarian and more or less make sense. The fact that the game takes place indoors in a man-made environment kind of affects everything else. For example, when you build your base, you're not building a house from the ground up. You're not using trees and logs to build walls and ceilings. You're squatting in a cafeteria, a pool locker room, a security station, and the things that you can craft come from makeshift office supplies. This is most obvious in the early game where you're duct taping magazines to your arms and legs as a piece of armor. Even in the mid-game when you have access to more anomalous materials, and your equipment becomes more advanced, it's still obviously made of things that you had to scrounge together from what was available. It gets advanced and science-y, but still somehow ramshackle. I like this a lot, I think it really suits the game's mood. You do eventually get past that stage and your equipment starts to look like it's more manufactured, but thankfully it takes a while to get there. Now, this place may be like Black Mesa, but you are no Gordon Freeman. You are his asthmatic cousin. Gordon could have this whole situation handled in 12 hours, tops. You are a nerdy little scientist. It's going to take you a lot longer. Let me show you something. You have stats, and your stats get better as you use them. You know, you have a range stat, you have a reload stat, you have a blunt melee stat, a sharp melee stat. This is what it looks like when your range stat is 0. The circle in the center is your crosshair, it's where you're aiming at. As you can see, it's waving back and forth quite a bit. That will never fully go away. Even when you get to the maximum ranged ability, it will still move about somewhat. When the circle is light blue, that means that what you're aiming at is within your effective range. When you're trying to hit something outside of your effective range, your reticle will become red and shake wildly. At level 0, this is your effective range. From where you are to where that circle is. If you're any further away, your arthritis is going to flare up, you won't be hitting anything. Look at the reload on this weapon. Look at how long this takes. I swear, it feels like your scientist is out of breath and coughing every time he does that. Now, that said, the game's not actually very difficult. The combat is fun, but it's not super involved. I think the average person can safely crank up the difficulty to the hardest available, even if they're playing solo, and they'll do okay. The combat is overall fine, it's functional. Normally, if combat was very simple, that would warrant some criticism. But in Abiotic Factor, even though the combat is simple, I still found it engaging. The fun and the challenge really comes from having to play intentionally. Your scientist sucks, and this is a survival game. Those two things work together to make the otherwise simple combat still really fun. Just to give a few examples, the peccary is basically the first enemy that is somewhat dangerous. Before you're properly armored, he can do quite a bit of damage, and he can inflict the bleeding status effect. Bleeding's probably the worst status effect. Your health goes down fairly quickly. You'll need to pull out a bandage and bandage yourself, which takes a little bit of time, which can be tough in the middle of combat with an enemy that is very in your face. That's not to say the peccary is hard, he certainly isn't, but instead of just swinging at the peccary, you could craft and use throwing nets. This stuns it briefly, but long enough for you to get a few swings in and then repeat. Deeper in the game, there are going to be enemies that have elemental weaknesses that you could make use of. Some have hard-to-reach weak points that you want to learn how to reach. I don't think that the combat is the main appeal of this game. It is the exploration and the crafting. But the levels are big, and going into new territory, or even old territory to get to new territory, can be viewed as a kind of expedition. You want to learn how to be good at the combat, so you're not using up all of your bandages or your healing items, or your ammunition right away, so you can actually get to the exploring without having to return to your base every 5 minutes. And you want to balance that with what you're actually taking out into these expeditions, since in these new areas, and even in old areas, you'll want to loot things that you know you'll need, or things that you might need later, or just things in general. Looting is good. So you want to be efficient in what you take, so that you can be abundant in what you bring back. Being good at the combat and the various types of enemies that you'll face facilitates that, and that's what makes it engaging. Okay, so back to the cafeteria. You've killed your first peccary, and entered into the rest of the office sector. You hear an announcement telling you to evacuate, and you can see a security officer in a kiosk. He tells you that he doesn't know what's going on, but that if you want to evacuate, you'll have to go through the surface tunnel in manufacturing. If you do try to go to manufacturing right away, you'll find a wounded forklift operator that was shot by military units unaffiliated with Cascade or regular army. He also tells you that you need to find a power cell so that you can use the forklift and open the door to manufacturing. At this point, you're basically turned loose. You know that the power cells are probably in level 3 of the office sector, but you don't know how to get there or exactly where they are. A lot of the game works like this. You'll be tasked with getting to a location or finding resources to craft something. You'll explore a pretty large area looking for whatever it is you're looking for, and as you do, you'll navigate. You'll find maps, you'll talk to NPCs, you'll read emails, and this will help point you in the right direction. The important part is that getting to level 3 will require you to go through an Antiverse. And the Antiverses are some of the best things about the game. Antiverses are distinct, self-contained portal worlds, with their own environments, hazards, biomes, creatures, and resources. Unlike the main facility sectors, these worlds reset periodically, so you can revisit them to farm materials. They're alternate dimensions that look and feel very different. They can be anything. You can have Silent Hill 2 world, or Bloodborne world, or Left 4 Dead world, or Elder Scrolls Oblivion world. I think they're a nice contrast and change of pace from the more structured feel of Cascade's different sectors. Now, the Antiverses are short, so they're not really levels in and of themselves. The levels are the sectors that you're exploring, and the Antiverses are just a small part of that bigger level. Remember, the game is linear and most of these Antiverses are required. You're going into them to further one or more of your goals. If you recall, we were trying to get to level 3 of the office sector. Going into that first Antiverse will end up letting us do that, allowing us to continue our search for the power cell. I really like this goal-oriented way the game functions. You want to leave the facility. To do that, you need to get to the surface tunnel. To do that, you need to get into manufacturing. To do that, you need to find a power cell. To do that, you need to get to level 3. To do that, you need to explore the office sector. It is fantastic, and while all of this is happening, you're still picking stuff up, you're unlocking new recipes, you're making new equipment, you're getting stronger, you're opening up shortcuts, you are creating a strong mental map of where everything is. Sadly, it doesn't maintain this level of quality when it comes to the level design all the way through. The problem starts appearing during the hydroplant sector. This is a good level, I really enjoyed it, but because it's so large and it needs so much space, it's very far removed from the rest of the facility, meaning there's not many alternate routes to get to different parts of the facility. There's really only the tram. And actually, the way the level's set up, there's not many opportunities for it to wrap in on itself either. There are still shortcuts, but around here they start being the teleportation kind of shortcuts. They stop being about clever design and just kind of take you where they want you to go. Now, I don't really hold this that much against the game. Dark Souls had the same problem, even it couldn't keep it up for the whole game. It's not like the levels suddenly become bad. There are still doors that you can only open from the other side, but now they're intra-level rather than inter-level. Okay, we've talked about the combat, and the Antiverses, and the exploration. Finally, let's talk about the survival. And we're talking about it at the end, because that corresponds with its importance. It still matters, but oddly, not that much. In an interview, the game's director said the following, quote, "So I've always had this interest in survival games, but I'm not a big fan of survival games. I play them with friends, but I always find them to be quite grindy and kind of boring. I like the exploration, I like the adventure, I like the roleplay of it, I like sitting around the campfires and chilling with your buds, and I think a lot of games don't promote that a lot. So that's why sitting is one of our major features in Abiotic Factor. It's actually how you rest and heal in a lot of ways, so we wanted to promote that environment." End quote. So I guess because of this philosophy that the director brought into the game, the survival elements, the hunger and thirst and things like that, are minimally invasive. You will die if you go long enough without getting food, but I actually am not sure if there are any penalties for being hungry or very hungry. It sure didn't feel like it, and besides, it takes a long time to get hungry anyway. Just to highlight my point, I did not know that you could boil water in this game. I wouldn't have known unless I had played with somebody else that discovered it. But when I played solo, I found that there was enough clean water sources across the facility that you could bring back to your base that I never really went thirsty. And that's despite the fact that I took a trait that makes me thirsty more often, and I was constantly wearing a suit, which increases how fast my thirst drains. So I needed water far more than normal, and I still don't think I needed it that much. The consequences of this low impact when it comes to the survival elements is that a lot of people that typically don't like survival games probably would be able to get into Abiotic Factor. But that also works vice versa. Those of us that like survival elements and want to deal with burdensome hunger and thirst meters really don't have the opportunity to interact with it that much. There are settings you can change that would increase how often you get hungry and thirsty, but that wouldn't fix the problem for you if you wanted to engage with something mechanically deeper. It would only get you to engage with something mechanically simple more often. Alright, that's most of the main stuff. I suppose I'm obligated to talk about story, and it's good, but I'm hesitant, so I'm going to put a second spoiler warning here. I'm not going to show anything that you wouldn't find out through reading the Steam page or looking at the various trailers that exist for the game. This is really more me being particular, because I like the way the game develops its story. So if you're already convinced, I would recommend just playing the game. So the thing about Gate is that it's not really like Black Mesa. It's like Black Mesa if they had gone through their big accident that opened a portal to a different world, but then coped really well with it, and then started opening portals to lots of different worlds, containing and experimenting with whatever they find there. The organization draws inspiration from the SCP Foundation. I don't really like SCPs, I've never gotten it, but Abiotic Factor kinda sold me on the concept. This is what it looks like when it's done really well. But one of the things that becomes clear early on is that the Antiverses and the immurement subjects that Cascade is researching are legitimately dangerous, worryingly so. In my opinion, the game's story is best when your motivations are clear, you're trying to get out. And as you're doing that, you learn more about what led to this crisis, what kind of research Cascade was doing, the different kind of immurement subjects they had contained, their thoughts on the different portal worlds that they discovered. It's really great when the game has a kind of immersive sim atmosphere, where you're listening to audio logs and reading through emails, learning more about the game's backstory, and the different people and factions involved in that backstory. Sadly though, even though I found the game's story extremely interesting for, let's say, 80% of my playtime, I don't believe it stuck the landing. The lead up to the final confrontation was disappointing, and for a while before that the game had stopped being about getting out of the facility. Ostensibly that was still the reason, but practically it wasn't. You as the player understood that the things the character was doing were stupid and weren't going to facilitate getting him out. Then you get to the final boss, which is, in my opinion, terrible. Made especially so if you play a melee character and have specialized into melee, because there will be very little for you to do during that encounter, and you better hope that your allies can pull your weight. And then finally the game ends on a pretty major cliffhanger, the kind that leaves a lot of questions up in the air, so much so that I found it unsatisfying. Now, all of that said, this is a positive review for this game. Whatever issues I have with it, this is still my game of the year. And I think it's just the best survival game, period. There does start to be a decline in the game's level design, but it's a decline from a very high peak. And I may have found the ending unsatisfying, but I don't find the story unsatisfying. I'm still very interested in where it's eventually going to lead to. Alright, that's basically the end of this video. In this last part of the video, I'm going to talk directly to the director. Zag, I see that you have a DLC planned for summer 2026. Zag, I need you to give me early access to that DLC. I promise to shill it. I'll shill it so good. I bought your mug, Zag. This is the only piece of merchandise I've ever bought for any game. I don't buy merch. I don't even drink coffee. And the mug even came out wrong. There's blue lines on it. You owe me, Zag.